The Defence Capability Assurance Oversight Bill of 2023 was introduced to the Senate earlier this year and was the subject of an inquiry by the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee, eliciting witnesses from currently serving officers within Defence, from academia and from industry, who put forward their views on both the current state of Defence's ability to consistently conduct the test and evaluation that is required to underpin risk assessments around the acquisition or upgrade or introduction into service of the equipment that Australian forces need. Overwhelmingly, the witnesses supported the introduction and the passage of this bill and the creation of the Defence Capability Assurance Agency. And just for those who are not familiar with the bill, the Supplementary Explanatory Memorandum just refreshes us that the outline is that the bill creates an independent statutory body responsible for assessing complex risks associated with material procurement sustaining, including but not limited to the technical risk pertaining to performance and certification during the acquisition phase, but also spans right from the start of that phase, ensuring that there are robust and accurate articulation of the requirements that a capability needs, through to the introduction into service and the integration with the force in being, so the accountable officers within Defence know that they have timely and accurate information upon which to make their decisions and their recommendations to government. In fact, the objective of the bill in the Supplementary Explanatory Memorandum is to expedite the procurement of defence capability by providing capability managers and the Australian government a high degree of confidence in the veracity and completeness of the information they use to make timely, risk-informed decisions, to provide assurance to capability managers, the Australian government and the Parliament that the weapons systems will be available for use when required and that they will be effective against both extant and emerging threats, and to make existing defence procurement processes and requirements more effective by ensuring that 1. Risk assessment throughout the capability lifecycle is consistently conducted by people who have appropriate qualifications and relevant experience. 2. The assessment of reporting of risk is independent, free from overt or unintended bias or influence. 3. Identified risk is transparent to decision-makers, and 4, that the proposed risk mitigations, where they are proposed by Defence, are actually effective. Now, it may surprise people that this bill has had to come forward at all, because the assumption would be there, if you looked at the rather copious amounts of defence policy in this area, that those are exactly the things that Defence does. And I have to say there are many people within the organisation who work diligently and implement that policy, and many projects do come to fruition to force integration successfully, but it is not consistent. And there have been enough failures over time, many of which have been the subject of specific ANAO reports, as well as Senate inquiries, that have highlighted that this assessment of risks, the articulation of the requirements that are required, the transparent reporting of risk to decision-makers has not been consistent, and it has led to failures that affect both the mission capability of the things that Australia is buying and the safety to the men and women who operate that equipment. And that is not something that is acceptable. And in fact, the ANAO did 2 specific reports on Defence's test and evaluation capability in 2002 and 2015. The Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee made specific recommendations in 2012, and yet in this most recent review by the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee, we found that many of the failures that were extant over 20 years ago, when the Sea Sprite debacle occurred, still exist and impact on even very recent projects today. And so the overwhelming view of witnesses during that inquiry was that reform is needed, and Defence themselves agreed with that reform was needed. They agreed that the principles behind this bill of independence, of ensuring competent staff, of ensuring transparent reporting to all levels of decision-making, and of accountability to make sure that the policy which Defence already has in place is consistently applied, are worth supporting. So we come to the position, though, where, having established all of that, Defence still said we can reform internally. But a range of the witnesses, in fact everyone bar Defence, highlighted that the history over the last 20 years is that internal reform has neither been effective nor sustainable over time. And with posting cycles, changing priorities, we see that it lapses back into the same patterns. And in the context of the Defence Strategic Update of 2020, the Defence Strategic Review of 2023, which highlight the deteriorating strategic circumstances that Australia faces, there is a need to substantially expand both the scope and complexity of Australia's military capability in a compressed timeframe. And so if ever there is a time where the men and women who operate this equipment need an answer to the question, will it achieve the mission and will it be safe to operate? And if ever there is a time where the government needs to know, is there a product in the market that will meet this requirement? And if not, what are the risks of modifying an existing product or developing a new one? Will it have an impact on schedule? Can we achieve the capability? Can we manage the cost that may come with that? Now is the time we need that information for both the warfighter, for the procurement agency, for the capability managers, the Chief of Army, Navy and Air Force and cyber and space domains, for the Australian Government, the National Security Committee of Cabinet, for this Parliament as representatives of the Australian people, and for the taxpayer to have confidence that governments of either persuasion are getting appropriate and accurate advice from the department. That is why the witnesses, all bar Defence, said, yes, we need an independent agency, or we need independence. They supported the creation of the DCAA. Defence had 4 key objections, which during the course of the inquiry were shown to be a misreading of the bill. One was they were concerned that the bill didn't actually create an agency that covered the full scope of test and evaluation, but as it was pointed out, the agency specifically looks to cover the entire capability life cycle, which goes from the conception of a capability, the defining of requirements that are effective and testable, that means that whatever we buy will actually achieve the mission and do so safely, through to assessment of tendered solutions, through to the introduction into service, through to the integration with the force in being. Their second objection was that perhaps it would cause a duplication of effort. But as pointed out by other witnesses to the inquiry, the whole intent of this bill is actually to streamline efforts, to coordinate existing resources, to add new resources so that assessment of risk is timely and done by competent people, which actually will expedite the procurement. And there were a number of cases cited by witnesses, some in camera, some in public. One Sky is an example of one that was publicly cited, where concerns about schedule led to Defence saying we won't do the kind of test and evaluation that is being proposed, and lo and behold, rather than being delivered on time, that project blew out some 7 years and several $100% over the budget. And there are many of those sort of examples that exist. Their third concern was that it may somehow diminish what they call the accountable officer's obligation to be able to assure the service chiefs and the government around the capabilities that are being procured and offered to government as military response options. But their own policy and their own evidence to the committee identifies that test and evaluation is actually the key method by which objective, unbiased, accurate risk is communicated to those same accountable officers around whether or not a mission system can achieve the objectives that are required for it and whether it will be safe. And so their own policy, their own evidence indicates that an organisation which provides more timely, more accurate, more reliable assessments of risk will actually facilitate these officers conducting their role. The fourth area where they had concerns, and this is one of the amendments that's contained in the supplementary explanatory memorandum, went to a concern which had also been expressed by some from the industry sector, that the proposal by the bill for the Defence Capability Assurance Agency to have a regulatory function and to ensure continuity and depth of expertise, the proposal is to have that regulatory function and a technical mastery area supplied by industry, created the possibility that whichever company won that contract may somehow develop a monopoly by setting standards that were inappropriate or limited other players. And so discussion during the inquiry and in the report into the inquiry highlighted that the explanatory memorandum and the bill should be amended to clarify that the Defence Capability Assurance Agency as a Commonwealth entity would be responsible for the issuing of subsequent contracts for people to deliver services, and that there will be an obligation on the Defence Capability Assurance Agency to make sure that the standards that were set by the regulator in fact met global best practice standards and were comparable with peer organisations such as the Directorate of Operational Test and Evaluation in the United States, such that they truly represented best practice and didn't advantage or disadvantage any player in the Australian market, which meant that the range of companies, including a number of small and medium-sized companies in Australia who provide such services, will continue to be able to, in fact, will have a greater role in the provision of that expert support for defence in both training but also the conduct, planning and reporting of risk assessment activities. And so in this amendment there is a new clause, subclause 4 at the end of clause 19, which highlights that there is now an obligation on the agency to ensure that the industry partner in maintaining, developing and regulating workforce and infrastructure standards, as mentioned in subsection 11.2, does not inhibit effective competition for the broader industry sector to deliver the services required to achieve the agency's function. The last thing that was raised during the inquiry was the fact that since the tabling of this legislation, which envisaged two oversight bodies to ensure accountability and transparency, one was an Inspector General of Defence Capability Assurance, which is similar in nature to the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, a way of having a group who are cleared and capable of ensuring compliance within organisations that appropriately operate behind classifications of information. So this would make sure that Defence engages with the Defence Capability Assurance Agencies, they take appropriate note of the reports that are provided, that they provide throughout the decision chain for capability upgrades or modifications that are being introduced into service, transparent reports of the risks that are identified, so that all the way through to the National Security Committee of Cabinet, people are able to interrogate what has been done to address risks and so actually expedite decision-making. And the other was a Parliamentary Joint Committee on Defence. Subsequent to this, the government, in its response to the Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade's inquiry into war powers, where a recommendation was the establishment of a statutory committee on defence, essentially replicates the role and purpose of what was envisaged by this recommendation in the DCA. So the second key amendment here is the removal of Part 4, which was the establishment of that committee, because the government's committee will do that. So I look forward to the contributions of other senators to this second reading debate. Obviously, we don't have time today to bring this to the second reading vote and the committee stage, but I have distributed amendments that reflect this explanatory memorandum, and I look forward in the new year to being able to complete this debate and to bring forward this change to the benefit of Australia's national security.